Kirby,
what, I was gonna ask you about everything else, 8 to 9 games. What went through your mind when that figure came out? You guys not only have the biggest recruiting budget, but by far. I mean, you knew about it, but what is Georgia? What do you get for $4.5 million at Georgia?
I think there's a little misnomer to that.
Okay.
I don't think that you'd have to really study the numbers, and I don't know how much you guys dig into accounting methods, but we don't have a school plane, so start with that. So if someone has a school plane, let's say they take 100 flights in that plane. They're not counting those 100 flights. We might take 100 flights that we purchase. So our recruiting numbers are imbalanced based on that. Now, do we spend on recruiting? Absolutely. Does the SEC school spend on recruiting? Absolutely. Is it necessary to be competitive? It is, and our administration's been great about supporting us. But you know, the numbers that people put out, some of those were eye-popping and catching, where some people are counting their methods a lot differently in terms of, especially flights, which is our #1 expense.
You're not ashamed of it. It can't hurt.
Well, I don't know that I mean, I want to be efficient.
Yeah.
You know, like we make decisions and we're conscious of budgets and we try to be smart. So I'm not sitting here. We got to do what we got to do to compete.
keeping with recruiting, how big of an issue do you feel tampering is, and do you think there's a way you guys can come together and try to corral it a little bit?
Look, I'm not one that gets in deep into a lot of these issues. That people have hot button topics they want to talk about. They have a word they want to talk about. I think tampering's been going on for a long time. It's probably more prevalent because it's much more easy to transition from one school to the other by way of the portal. So, but look, if kids are exploring to leave, you know, it's really hard to police. You know, ask the NCAA, because if a kid goes to his trainer or his high school coach, well, we have people talking to those trainers and those high school coaches, and word of mouth spreads. The guy's unhappy, he's looking, and then the next thing you know, he's in the portal and he's already gotten somewhere he wants to go. I don't really get caught up in it. I worry a lot more about my roster, and I say, how do we manage the people that we have so that they don't want to go somewhere else? So I focus on that. Not a lot of these teams have people on their staffs that go out and watch the opposing team on the field to write down how they look, how they run. They're surveying the field for the portal. We're not that elaborate. I mean, we're going to try to focus on our guys, and retention is probably more important to me than anything.
How much energy do you have to spend, especially during those late season time, on the retention piece, and almost like you're re-recruiting your own roster to try to keep that retention?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, we spend a lot of time on connection and like having conversation. Where are you? Are you happy with where you are? If you're not, what can we do to improve that, improve you as a player? Do you think you're being developed? And if they feel like they're being developed and they have examples of guys who've been in our program, and I always throw Quay Walker out, but he was a kid that never started until his 3rd year, and he went in the 1st round. You know, most kids are ready to leave if they're not starting by their 3rd year, and that was a great example for him. But again, it's a lot more energy now in terms of spending with your own roster and just trying to maintain it. It's not just the portal, it's the combination of the portal, the NIL, everything going on that makes it at times excruciating.
For clear cases of tampering, would you like to see penalties?
For what?
For clear cases of tampering, would you like to see penalties?
Well, there are penalties for tampering. For clear cases of tampering. Well, I mean, most of the time, if they have a clear case, there's something done about it. The problem is, not many people can. It's hard to police that. It was hard to police it before, so it's disturbing. It's upsetting. But I don't know. People want to blame the coaches for the tampering. A lot of time, it's the player who is negotiating or is looking for greener pastures, and when they do that, sometimes they create the tampering. You know, it goes both ways. But I think it's hard to police. And look, we have not been a major portal team, so I could be sitting here telling you something that those 12, 13 other guys, 14 other guys come in here and say is a major issue. I'm not trying to go out and get anybody else. I want to get a kid from high school and develop him. Now, ultimately, if we have a deficiency somewhere or we have a spot available, then we'll look to use the portal, but it's not something we've done a lot.
Kirby, on the 8 to 9 game thing, what's the biggest variable for you in Georgia in the whole debate?
The most overrated conversation there ever was. 4 years, you'll play everybody home and away. I get it, the traditional rivalries, you have 3, you have 2, you have 1, you have this, you have that. I mean, you guys need something to write about bad when you start talking about this. It's just not that big a deal to me, because you have to win your games to advance, right? You need to be in the SEC championship, possibly with an expanded playoff. That's a lot better topic for me. Is somebody going to get an advantage by not going to the SEC championship and making the playoff? That's a lot better topic to me than 8 or 9 games. I mean, I think you got to win your games. And now more than ever, it's going to be that way, because it's not going to be divisions. But that's true for both.
What would you think about the Georgia-Auburn game being played every 2 years if it goes to sticks at 8?
It's gonna be tough, you know. There's so many people that want that historic rivalry, including me. I was part of that rivalry. I grew up part of that rivalry. I think it's one of the best there is, but I think it's one of the costs of progress, bringing 2 more teams in. It's one of the costs of scheduling, getting more balance in terms of you're going to play everybody. I think that it's not going to just be Georgia Auburn. It's going to be somebody else for somebody else. Sometimes you call that progress. Sometimes you upset the fan. I think that's a good debate in terms of whether fans, because your traditionalists want those rivalries, and others want to see you play the teams they never get to see you play, and you can't have both.
Kirby, you obviously don't get too wrapped up in things you can't control. You've told us that many times, and clearly you don't have a big dog in the fight with 8 versus 9. Why does everybody else then? Why aren't more people taking the approach you are, that if you're going to play everybody in 4 years, what's the difference?
I can't honestly tell you that. I don't know why people get wrapped up in it. I think with the 9, obviously there's the 3 permanents, and that creates a lot more debate, because teams are like, wait, I've got to play them. I'm concerned with who I have to play. Well, I'm looking at it like you're going to probably play 1 or 2 of those 3 anyway, because it's going to circle so quickly. And you know, you can go 10-year history, 20-year history, 5-year history, 3-year history, and pretty much over the SEC it changes. You know, over outside of what Alabama's done for this time that Nick's been there, it's really been cyclical, and it'll probably over the next 20, 30 years, you know, be the same way. So I don't get caught up in it a lot.
If, like you said, you start to see teams from outside the SEC championship make the playoff, and then there's a team that's in it that gets penalized for losing, does that make you start to reevaluate the value of a conference championship if the ultimate goal is to make the playoff?
If that happened in that scenario you said, then probably so, but I don't know that would happen. It used to be everybody thought you got penalized for what bowl game you got sent to when you lost the SEC championship game. They put a thing in place to say, okay, if you lose the SEC championship, you can't fall further than this. I would think that we would have a system set up that if you made that, and we're not talking about divisions now, because divisions were different. You could have 2 really strong teams over here and 1 okay team over here, and they play each other. That happened some. I know when I was in Alabama at the West, you know, there were teams in the West that were sometimes better than the team that won the East. That's not going to be the case. So the 2 teams that go, you would like to think, I'm looking at it more as a competitive disadvantage of you might have to play 1 week or 2 weeks later after just playing that game, which will be the most physical game you play all year.
Coach, the calendar itself, beginning next year, we're going to have a national championship game on MLK Day. Of expanding that calendar, how much does that influence? You've talked a lot about recruiting, of what that impacts your team. Of you're trying to recruit itself, but you're also trying to roll with what's coming down the road calendar-wise. How much does the calendar affect moving forward, you think?
You're saying because the national championship game will fall a week later? The concern there? Not a major concern for me, because I think they're going to change the dates around that. Okay, they're not going to. I mean, there's some answers we still have to get in terms of, okay, what's going on with the portal while these playoffs are going? Because kids need to be able to go and pick their schools. What about when schools start? Guy's playing on this team, but he's leaving, and they started school over there. There's problems inherent with that, and now you're extending that 1 week. They've got to figure that out. You know, going to campuses around Christmas. You know, there's a lot of things that got to happen in regards to that. But I'm not as concerned about recruiting, because they'll make that fit it. And the best thing you can do in recruiting is what? Win. Right? So these guys got mad at me in Birmingham, and Stoops told me there's no crying from the eye, because I was complaining about something having to play and not being able to go do these recruits. Well, if you're playing, then you're getting free advertisement, and that's probably a good thing.
Kirby, obviously just a few years ago, you were trying to get to the mountaintop. You guys have been there the last 2 years. Now you're trying to go for a third. And I still hear you talk about how, you know, we're trying to still do what I do and block out the noise. Do you when you hear people say that Georgia has surpassed Alabama as the top program to model in college football, how do you react to that, and how do you deal with that with your players when they hear that a lot?
First off, I don't hear that a lot. Second of all, I don't measure our program based on their program. I mean, we measure our program based on the best we can do, and we try to do the best job we can each and every year. Our success is based on how we work out, how we perform, how we run, how we turn over the ball, how we convert third downs. I mean, it's really that simple. It's not based on another program. I have the utmost respect for Nick and Alabama and everything they've done, but that doesn't have anything to do with us. And the focus for us has got to be on us.
Kirby, you guys have some new players coming into town this week, I guess. What is your message to them in light of some recent arrests with Denylon and Marcus and those guys in particular? Any discipline you can share with us?
No, and you're talking about in terms of the players coming in?
Yeah, you know, new
Players
tech-
coming in are being basically put into our team setting tomorrow night, maybe tonight, and they're gonna get to visit with our older players. But as far as kind of putting those guys in, integrating those guys into our team, we have team meetings, we go over the team rules, we do all that stuff, but that has nothing to do with the other. One has nothing to do with the other. My biggest concern is what our guys are doing when they're not with us, when they're not on the field. They've been home for probably, I don't know, 3 weeks now, and that's been a big concern. It's a big concern when they're with us. But it has nothing to do with the new guys coming in. The new guys coming in will be integrated into the team and the program and adhere to our rules.
Are you doing anything more to try to head off more?
Yeah, I think the education piece is the first thing, because everybody wants to know what the punishment is. Well, the players know what the punishment is, and that's important for our guys to acknowledge that and understand it. But I want to educate further. I want to make sure they understand. Nobody's more embarrassed than Marcus Roseby and his parents. Oh my gosh, they're just crushed. But Marcus has to learn from this, and so is Denylon. And part of being an 18-year-old young man and a 19-year-old young man and a 20-year-old young man is you have to learn from your mistakes. I mean, I was that age once too, and we don't condone anything. They got to do a good job of making good decisions off the field, and we've got a lot more education things lined up to come, but it's not just about that. It's about everything that they can get into in terms of gambling, in terms of everything you can possibly, drugs and alcohol, treatment of the opposite sex. I mean, we have a ton of speakers during our summer circuit program. We've ramped that up, but do all we can to curtail.
Coach, you mentioned gambling. How much have you strengthened that message? Because
Well, we've always had it as part of it.
but in lieu of recent developments, how much is that message going to be strengthened?
Well, like I said, ours was pretty strong, because we've had issues with that too in the past, and it's more prevalent. I can't turn on a TV now without seeing something, and you know, there's a lot of debate out there about what's right and what's wrong, but the NCAA rule is pretty harsh for gambling relative to some other things, and it's pretty obvious why, because they don't want that to infiltrate. There's a lot of states, I know, including ours, that's been a great debate whether to allow that to come into your state. And it's more about revenue for the state, it's more about protection for your schools, but these kids can do this regardless of what state. You know, it's easy access. I mean, when I turn on the TV in a sports game, sporting event, I see it everywhere. So we try our best to educate the players, and sometimes it takes somebody having a pitfall to learn from their mistake.
Do the players understand the gravity of the situation, in your opinion, and these days and age of college athletics and the gambling apps that are out there and whatnot? I don't know how much you pay attention to that besides viewing it, but do you think they understand it?
I don't know that they completely understand it. I think what's happening now is it's becoming much more prevalent, and they have to, because what you just said, I didn't even understand the app. I didn't even know it, because I don't gamble, I don't bet, I don't have those apps. Or when you go start researching it, and we were researching it really in the last year, it's like, I mean, these kids, they have it on, there's like Chinese baseball games and stuff that people are gambling on. It's like, what? I mean, they're betting on horse racing in another country. And it's literally crazy how easy it is and the access they have to it. And then the punishment, you have to ask yourself, oh my gosh, this guy could lose his entire eligibility forever for betting on a horse race, you know, in another country. So we had these same cycles back when the coaches were doing the NCAA and the you know, guys that got in trouble for filling out the tournament bracket. I mean, education is the key, and making sure they understand the rules and they have the discipline to follow them.
We got time for 2 more questions?
Kirby, along those lines, I feel like we've been talking about an injury report in college football forever, but with the prevalence of gambling, it does seem like the information is commoditized because it's not out there. So whether it's an injury report or something that sort of forces you guys to be a little more transparent with some of your availability issues, is it worth talking about? Is it gonna be talked about this week?
I honestly have no clue. I mean, look, I don't know how it's commoditized. I don't understand that, okay? So it's above, if everybody's giving an injury report, I have no problem giving an injury report. They do it in the NFL. I was in the NFL. That's not a huge deal as long as it's a level playing field. A lot of the issues that are created in college sports today are based on an imbalance because one state has this and another state has this. And we go back to the same thing. We need great leadership. We need somebody to come along and say, this is the way it's gonna be done, and everybody adhere to it, and then we can do it. Now, will that stop gambling? Probably not. Will it stop guys from trying to get inside information? Probably won't. But the NFL has it just as well.
Would you like to see college athletes be allowed to gamble on stuff that they're not involved in, whether it's the NBA or Chinese baseball or whatever?
I have to defer to somebody else that knows, because I really don't have an opinion on that. I mean, I hope that our guys would be fiscally responsible, that they would choose not to do that. And you gotta ask yourself, are these kids that are 18 to 22 years old smart enough to know the difference? It scares me. So, I mean, I would not want our players doing that at all, whether it was legal or not, because, I mean, I'd rather money be in something a little safer than in gambling.
Do you have any thoughts on the changes in the clock in terms of, not stopping on first downs and so forth?
No, I think it's another one that I think's a lot to do about not much. I mean, they did a lot of studies, at least in our league, and don't think it'll change it 2 to 3 plays per game. I do think the game's getting long, and this is an attempt to try to make it a little more efficient for the fan and the viewer, which is a big part of what we do. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.